Okay. The reason that we're even here is because you said, I asked you, like, what, I don't even understand how you got here. And you're like, well, it's my wife, and it's like habit and whatever. It's because I saw you and you running all these events. And I've actually thought about this for years. I'm like, he's the guy setting up while everyone is davening. He's the guy like taking one for the team so that everyone can like daven. And then I was just thinking like, there's no way in hell this guy's davening after everyone's eating or before. Like,
right.
He just has a free pass to never daven because he's the guy setting up the kiddush, right? Like there was always that guy. He was my cousin actually in LA at our shul growing up. He was always in the kitchen, but like someone has to do that job. But he sat there with like a sitter and his talis. He davened by himself in the kitchen. And I was always like, it sucks for that guy that he can't be in shul. But like, you know what? Good for him. He's taking one for the team, right?
Right.
So I seen you at events for years, and I'm just like, how the hell does this guy ever daven? Like, there's no way he does. I'm like, and if he does, he's like a secret tzaddik because, yes, I know you do a lot of good for stuff. And anytime, like, when you showed up at Chabad and you fixed that dude's falafel truck,
Right.
I'm like, something, I tell people this, I'm like, something you guys don't understand. Like, forget the food, it's good, it's more, it's a lot, it's little, whatever it is. You can say whatever you want.
Right.
I'm like, no one is taking care of more ancillary stuff for your event than John.
Right.
I'm like, some guy could do better food, worse food, fancier food, less. I'm like, say what you want to say. I'm like, John is going to plug in a generator because your shul lost power to make sure that your whole party works. Right? Like, there's going to be a million things that he does. And I told that to Rabbi Garari, and he's like, you're so right. He's like, that guy, he comes in the clutch. Like, remember at Judah's bar mitzvah? Kept losing power?
Right.
And I don't even think you remember because probably like par for the course for you. Anyway, the point is I was super intrigued by the fact that, and just in general, like, not just here, everywhere, like I see a community of like people who just go through the motions. Like, I grew up secular, right? I know so many people that just are not from because it just doesn't speak to them, right? Because it's like, I have to do so much. Like, you're telling me I have to shut everything down on Shabbos, or like I can only eat certain foods or whatever. And like, there's so many people who just do it as a lifestyle. Like, that's just what they're used to, right?
Right.
And like, I'm not saying they don't feel anything, but I just feel like the mainstream Judaism is one that is kind of unappealing. Like, I have friends who literally were in kollel, married for years, and they go to shul, they learn. These are some people that you know, okay? That you're like, that's a frum guy. He's at the daf at 5:30 in the morning. He's at minyan. He's a chazan. He's a whatever. And I promise you, if you talk to them for 1 minute, they're like, I feel zero. I'm just like, what the hell? I don't even understand that. Like, if I feel nothing, I'm going to do nothing.
Right.
There's a big disconnect. It's almost like you know how like white people, they name their kids like American names, and their guy's name is like, you know, Jeffrey Howard, and his name in Hebrew is like Chaim Yechiel, and there's like no connection.
Right.
So I feel like there's a huge disconnect between like doing stuff and like feeling anything that would make you want to do stuff. Okay?
True.
And just kind of watching what you were doing, I was like, this guy is just like a creature of habit. Like, it works for his wife, it works for his kids, it works socially, it's good for his business.
Right.
Like, because I remember for Judah's bar mitzvah, it was like, well, John doesn't have a mashgiach unless you ask him to. I was like, it's John. What do you mean? Like, he works at a Suburban, or Rabbi Silver is there. Like, I'm like, why wouldn't I trust John, right? And then I was thinking about it. I was like, wait, but like, the whole concept is like, you have like a God-fearing guy who's not gonna like mess with his food because of how it affects others, and then it could potentially affect his business. And the whole mashgiach thing is like, okay, there's whatever. There's a fear that it can mess with business, but I'm like, being from is good for John's business. Like,
Right.
what would your business be without the from community, right?
Right. You're just an everyday caterer.
Right? Just another caterer.
Right.
So I was just like, and then when I started talking to you, where were we?
We're at bar mitzvah. Your niece's bar mitzvah.
Oh, Dahlia's bar mitzvah.
That's what,
right.
Yeah. And every time I see you since then, I'm like, I need to get started.
Right.
It's like, but I want to get started.
You know what? I honestly forgot. And then I saw you somewhere, maybe at the Purim, at the Sukkot thing or whatever.
Right.
And I was just like, wasn't I supposed to learn with John? And I'm like, okay, we're gonna make it happen.
Every time I see you, I'm like, we gotta start, guys.
So here's the deal. The pandemic of like not feeling anything is very common. Now here's the thing. It's hard to want to do stuff when there's no drive and no motivation. Like, even out of habit, like, okay, I have to do it. I have to do this. Like, it happens with anything, work, whatever. The problem is that, like, it's almost like an oven that just like has like the pilot light on, is always on. Okay, this is literally how a Jew is built. There's always like that pilot flame that's lit, even if you see that there's nothing burning. Okay, so like, if I'm gonna go put some food on the burner, yeah, the pilot's on, which means you can always ignite it if you want to. But, because if the pilot was off, then what are you gonna do, right? You could sit there all day with a butane lighter and try your best and put lighter fluid and nothing's gonna happen. So, but you can't cook anything unless the pilot's on. And once it's on, okay, fine, the flame could be on low, it can be on high, it can go up and down. Now, the reality is that the Jew always has that pilot light on. You can't extinguish that, because the way that a Jewish soul works is that Hashem breathed out a part of him and then blew it into us and then gave that to us. And the soul technically has 5 levels, and that innermost level is the pilot light, and it's always one with Hashem. So even when we're down here in a body and we're going about our business and we're doing all this stuff, if we feel nothing, if you put your hand on top of the burner and the pilot's on, but there's no flame coming out of the burners, you're not going to get burned. You don't even feel it.
Right.
That doesn't mean it's not there and that it's not on, but it's not. There's not going to be any flame up top. When a Jew has no choice but to have that pilot light on at all times, because the soul of a Jew is always fully connected with Hashem above, just like it was before it came down into your body. So when someone passes away and the part of his soul leaves his body that gives life to his body, that doesn't affect the pilot. The pilot light has been on before. It's almost like it's always plugged into the charger, okay?
Right.
And then when you take your battery out and it runs throughout the course of the day, like it always can plug back in, that pilot light is always connected because it's literally a part of God. And since Hashem's infinite, so is the soul of a Jew. Okay? So that never changes for us.
Right.
The pilot light simply can't switch off unless Hashem says, I want there to be no more neshamas. I don't want souls anymore. I just want to go back to revert to being just me, the way it was before he ever created any of us, okay?
Got it.
Now, most people don't know any of this. This is probably the first time you ever heard me anyone say anything like this, right? Now, here's why. Torah used to be something that everyone knew by heart, okay? So, the Chumash, 5 books of Moses, those were all known by Torah, by people, because they were close to Har Sinai, right? And the closer you were to getting the Torah, the more you heard your story from your grandfather, right? Like my grandfather, told me stories of him in Egypt as a kid. I don't have to go read it in a book. I heard it from him, right? Now, as you get further and further and further from Har Sinai, from getting the Torah, as you get further from the Beis Hamikdash and seeing all these things happen, it used to be that it was like father to son, and that's how you knew it. And people were closer to the source, so I don't want to say that they were holier, but they were much better with information than we are. And if you look at like the graduation of how Torah went from the 5 books of Moses to the Mishnah to the Gemara to the Shulchan Aruch, all this other stuff, the reason it's being like codified and written down is because people just started to forget stuff. But it used to be that like you couldn't not feel godliness or Torah because you were so close to the source. You were so close to the time when we all got to see Hashem, right? So it was almost like a second nature. Like you knew, imagine any kid in the street knowing all of Chumash by heart, right? It's hard to imagine today, but that's what it was, okay? So
it boggles my mind that I've been in this world 20 some years already. That somebody can go and take and just start reading Hebrew and pull it apart and then translate it in English.
But it used to be that everyone knew all of this.
Right.
Like, if you go to the Yemenite Jews, when they weren't writing stuff down, they knew all of Torah by heart because that's what they used to learn. They used to sing it, and because they wanted to remember it from one generation to the next. Now, the closer you were to the source, the easier it was to remember, right? And now you're starting to hear a story that your grandfather told your great-grandfather that keeps going on and on and on. It's like playing broken telephone a little bit. So the people who started realizing that like, hey, this stuff is going to fall apart if we don't preserve it, started writing these down, okay? But it wasn't like the Mishnah, the halachas in the Mishnah didn't exist before the Mishnah was written. Because everything was given to Moshe at Har Sinai. Like Moshe spent 40 days over there because Hashem showed him all of the Torah from start to finish. From the beginning of the world to the time of Mashiach. Every single thing there ever is in Torah, Moshe Rabbeinu saw. So there's no such thing as new Torah, okay? It's our job to sort of, Torah's like these diamonds that are just sitting in the rough, in the earth. It's our job to go and mine that, to find it. So when you're saying, oh, well, how can you say there's no new Torah if people write new Sfarim all the time? Well, no, Hashem planted it here. He wanted us to toil and to cultivate that. But it's not new. It was all given to Moshe. It says that Moshe got to see from his generation to the end of all generations. He knows everything that there is because time is a function of this world. It's hard for us to conceptualize a world without time because that's all we know. There's a before, there's a now, and a later. But when it comes to Hashem, He sees it all on a timeline. Everything just exists. Only in this world is there something called time where we're looking at now, before, later, future, present, past. For Hashem, He literally showed Moshe Rabbeinu all of it and said, this is the Torah. Now, because we live on this timeline, and when the Torah was given, and when people started to forget, so we're seeing this progression of, okay, well, people knew more Torah then, and people felt more then, and they were able to see fire in the shape of a lion come out of the sky and grab the sacrifices off of the altar in the Beis Hamikdash. And if you see that, I guarantee you're going to want to serve Hashem, right? So it's easier then. And the more you get removed from those times where everyone knows Torah by heart, and when you're seeing all these open miracles, the more difficult it is to start feeling things, okay? Now you're talking about 3,000 years since then. So put us in right now, right? 5785, and the year 2024, where no one knows anything by heart. They simply Google it. And yeah, it's pretty amazing that, and that's why I don't want to say people were holier back then, because to be this far removed from being able to see and just know that in your core, and still be keeping Shabbos and kosher, is not any less miraculous than it was that they knew all of Torah by heart. Okay? Because imagine that, there's this old Jewish story that basically says that there was a guy who went to stay at an inn, and he didn't have what to pay, so the poritz dug a hole and he threw him in the pit, and he said, until you pay or your family pays, you can't come out. Now this guy couldn't pay, so he stayed in the pit. before you know it, the guy built a whole family in the pit.
Right.
Now, he's not living in the world anymore, he's just in this pit. And he's building a family, that family has kids, they build a whole community. 3,000 years later, there's a whole world that lives inside this pit, right? Now, they're all talking about how their great-great-great-grandfather got thrown in the pit, and they're not even in the real world. They just live in this pit because that's how they ended up getting here, okay? But they all know of this time where they live certain rules because their great-great-great-great-grandfather lived with those rules because he came from the real world. But then he got thrown into this pit, and because they're still living in this pit, they still follow the rules of the guy who came from the real world, right? Now, they don't even know about the real world. They've only ever known the pit. It's not like they're saying, oh, it was my father and he told me directly. Like, this is 3,000 years later. They're still talking about how their great-grandfather got thrown into the pit and they live these certain rules from the regular world, even though they don't even know what the regular world is, right? Literally, that's us, okay? So the fact that those guys in the pit 3,000 years later are still following rules because someone 3,000 years before told them about the rules is freaking amazing. Right? Mm-hmm. Like, that's why I'm saying today, for a John Kaplan who feels nothing, to keep Shabbos and kosher when he's this far removed from feeling anything is a miracle. Okay? So I don't want to say that anyone is more holy because they knew the whole Torah by heart or because they knew less. You're almost talking about like a world where there's full light and everyone knows and can see everything versus a world where there's literally zero light and we're all walking around in the dark, blind, and we're still able to find things. Like, that's much more incredible. We can't see anything, right? So I don't want to make that comparison, but as the world got further and further and further away from having clarity, it became much more difficult to feel any connection. And about 300 years ago, what the world had become was a place where you either were scholarly or you were nothing. It became that if you were in Europe, you were either in Vilna, where you were learning in these towns in Poland and Ukraine and all these places. You were either a yeshiva student, where you're talking about reading Hebrew and translating, where you could understand Torah and you spent all day learning, or you were a guy who freaking paved roads and milked cows and dug ditches and did whatever, and you were sort of irrelevant at the time. Judaism came to this point where it's like, either you do everything or you're just a nobody. And the nobodies really had no way to serve, because the way you served God at the time, even though you still davened and you did everything, was you were learned. You could read. You had connection because you could open up a Gemara and learn Gemara. And the people who learned were very serious and were very, holy people. But there became this point where the people who couldn't do that, they were losers of Judaism. They were the rejects, because they weren't educated, they weren't literate, they weren't whatever. They were just regular Yidden just working, okay? Now, comes along the Baal Shem Tov, and he's like, hold up one second. These people have the same pilot light that the guys in Vilna who are learning have, right? The pilot light in a Jew is the same across the board. It's not like, oh, you're smarter, you're better looking, you're wealthier. No, it's just a pilot light that all originated in the same place, which is that Hashem sucked in and then blew out our neshamas into existence. And so on that level, the pilot light of Moshe Rabbeinu and the pilot light of John Kaplan is all the same pilot light. It's just a basic little flame, okay? That basic flame that's connected to God all the time is what the Baal Shem Tov recognized was in all these Jews that were basically, I don't want to say ostracized, but were basically made to become irrelevant Jews. What made you a Jew if you were in yeshiva? No, what makes you Jew is the pilot light. The fact that you're connected to God at all times. So the Baal Shem Tov rolls around and is like, look, these Jews need to become relevant again. Like, why should they have any less of a connection to Hashem? Why should they be any less close or have any less access to God than the people who are sitting in yeshiva all day, right? Like, there's no reason.
Right.
They're not worse Jews. A Jew is a Jew all day. It's just about the fact that some people were able to connect because they were born into that, and some people were just, born, ditch diggers or whatever they did
Right.
back then, right? You were a shoe repair guy, you were whatever you were, and those people didn't have time to learn all day. They might not have had time to daven. They weren't in a base medrash. They weren't learned people, and they got looked down on. Okay, so the Baal Shem Tov came to the conclusion that these people need some sort of antibiotic, some sort of penicillin at the time, right? Anyone who wants to say that penicillin was invented and didn't exist in the world doesn't realize that the potential for penicillin was here all the time. We just didn't know what to do with it. We didn't know how to make penicillin, right? So when all these people were dying from all these sort of wacko diseases for a gazillion years, all of a sudden, someone rolls around and is like, hey, take a bunch of these plants and stuff and make penicillin, and now we're curing people, right?
Right.
Now, did that person invent penicillin from something that didn't exist? No, Hashem decided that penicillin, it was time to reveal penicillin to the world, so people stopped dying from whatever the hell they would die from, okay? And so all of a sudden, because there's no new creations, everything is just a change of a change. There's something here and I formed it into something else. Every invention, everything we ever did is just, we took something that existed and we figured out how to utilize it. The Baal Shem Tov said, wait a second. There's this hidden part of the Torah, which has only been hidden. It was only accessible to the elite of the elite. The inner secret, the fire of the Torah, okay? Now, sometimes when the pilot light is on, but it's really dim, a little bit of lighter fluid won't do the trick. You need to throw a full diesel truck onto it, right?
Right.
So coming to a guy who milks cows all day and saying, hey, by the way, there's a halacha that says you have to do this. Okay, fine. But if you start revealing inner secrets of the Torah that were hidden for thousands of years, that were only accessible to the elite, the most learned, all of a sudden, people start going nuts at you. Like, what are you doing? You're giving gold to the shoemaker? You're giving the secrets away to the poor guy, to the loser, to the guy who doesn't learn? Like, what are you even doing? Well, like, you're giving control of the stock portfolio to a second grader? Like, what are you even doing, okay? Right. So there's this huge uproar of the learned Jews that are like, you can't give away the secrets of Torah to the masses. But the Baal Shem Tov recognized that there's a pandemic going on where we're going to lose all these Jewish people's connection to Hashem simply because they can't learn. They don't have time. They don't know how. They're not in the system.
Right.
And he's like, wait a second. I need to take out a blowtorch right now and just start blowing fire everywhere. Because these people already have the wick. There's a pilot light going on. They just need to catch something so that it sparks them and ignites them, okay? This caused a huge uproar because you're giving our secrets away. But who are you giving it to? You're giving it to the Jews. It's staying within the community. Not like they went on some, crazy, trip to go convert Goyim into Jews. It was like, no, these are our people, right? So Baal Shem Tov starts going around and basically gets a directive from the heavens that say, okay, it's time. The world is at such a low point where the Jewish people are so far from the source. The only thing that's going to wake them up is if we reach into their pilot lights and ignite everything else. Okay? It used to be that there was already a flame on the burner. Okay, so you can add a little bit and turn it up or turn it down. There's a flame there. It got to the point where the only thing left was the pilot light. Everything else was turned off for a lot of the Jewish people. So the Baal Shem Tov comes on and says, the only way for me to ignite the rest is if I ignite the pilot light. I have to hit the source to make everything else ignite. Because at this point, they're so far away. They're so far away. Like, imagine someone's exiled in Siberia and it's minus 40 degrees and you bring them like a little space heater the size of your phone or like a little cup of hot chocolate and say, hold this, it'll warm you up. What's that going to do for them? But if you come in with a freaking full tent with heaters and all this other stuff and you come in with the source of fire, you can banish minus 40 degrees of cold. And that's what he needed, okay? So he was like, okay, it's time for me to take the fire of Judaism, the fire of Torah, the inner, not revealed, hidden dimensions of Torah, and start spreading it to the masses. Because that's the only thing that's going to allow the pilot lights to catch on like wildfire, okay? So when anyone says, oh, what's this Chassidus? How come Jews didn't need Chassidus up until 300 years ago? We were all great. We had a base of we had all this stuff. They were so close to the source, there was already fire on the burners. Once it got to a point where it was like, well, the pilot lights are almost out. All of a sudden, Baal Shem Tov comes around with a blowtorch and just starts lighting up everything, okay? Which obviously created a lot of waves, because even up in Shamayim, the heavenly court is like, yo, Hashem, look what this dude's doing. He's giving away all your hidden treasures. Like all the stuff that was hidden just for the people that needed it, the people who were elite, the people who were allowed, he's giving it to anyone. Anyone who comes by, he's just handing out free secrets. So Shamayim goes crazy, and there's this whole big backlash from down here. And ultimately, the Baal Shem Tov gets permission from above. And there's a famous story that on Rosh Hashanah, the Baal Shem Tov was meditating, and he went up to the Heichal of Mashiach. He went up to the room, the chambers where Mashiach in the future is going to come, and he sits. And the Baal Shem Tov says that he goes up to this place on Rosh Hashanah, and he sees Mashiach's neshama sitting in this chamber, and he says, when are you going to come? And Mashiach looks at him and says, when your work is spread throughout the world, that's when I'll come. Okay? It says, Lech she'afutzu ma'anotecha chutza, that the wellsprings, your wellsprings, will be dispersed outwardly. And so all of a sudden he gets the blessing, he gets the nod and says, all right guys, I'm going ballistic with this blowtorch right now. And that sets off a movement where now 300 years later, you don't even realize that half of the stuff you know that just seems regular to you was completely foreign before the Baal Shem Tov. So it used to be that God only existed in holy places, a shul, a chuppah, places that were deserved to be holy. When there was a minyan of men, it wasn't, the song Hashem is here, Hashem is there, right? Up, up, down, he's everywhere. That is a foreign concept pre the Baal Shem Tov, okay? Like, Hashem there can't be godliness in a bathroom. That's a disgusting place, right? But we know now that Hashem is everywhere. There is no place devoid of Hashem, or else it would all cease to exist.
Right.
But these are all concepts that today, there really isn't this struggle of Chassidus versus non-Chassidus, maybe a little bit, but for the most part, these concepts became so integrated into the mainstream that you know a lot of them without even realizing that they come from here, because it just became our norm.
Right.
Why am I telling you all of this? Because we're going to learn this book of Tanya, okay? Tanya wasn't written by the Baal Shem Tov, but every single Chassidus that ever exists, every sect of Chassidus you ever heard of, Breslov, Satmar, Chabad, whoever, they originated because of the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov said, it's time to take the Kabbalah, the revealed parts of the Torah, and package it in a way that the masses can accept it, okay? So if you read Zohar, if you read the Kabbalah, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, you won't know what the hell is going on. But the concepts from there were taken by the Baal Shem Tov, and then by different rebbes of different chassiduses, and basically said, okay, we're going to package them in a way using mashals, examples, analogies, things that you can relate to, so you could understand actual godliness. Not just like, okay, great, this is what you do on Shabbos, and this is how you shech the pig, a cow, and you can't shech the pig because of this. Forget all of that. You want to know godliness? You want to know your own soul? You need the inner revealed dimension, the not revealed dimension of the Torah. And that's what the Baal Shem Tov came to do. Once he did that, he then had a disciple named the Maggid of Mezrich, you probably heard of. The Maggid of Mezrich continued what the Baal Shem Tov was doing. And there were all these contemporaries that were similar.
Right.
And from the Maggid came the Alter Rebbe, who's the Baal Tanya, I'm sure you've heard Rebbe Silber talk about. There was all these different Rebbes who in all different places, who formed sort of their own path following the ways of the Baal Shem Tov. Okay? All the way down to here to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. So as far as Chabad goes, after the Baal Shem Tov, after the Maggid came the Baal Tanya, the Alter Rebbe, and his big difference between him and every other Rebbe was that he created something called Chabad, which Chabad stands for Chokhmah, Bina, and Dat. I don't know if you ever knew that. Chokhmah, Bina, and Dat, which are the three intellectual faculties of the brain. Wisdom, understanding, and intellect, and knowledge. So every other Chassidus said, okay, we have to wake up these Jews, right? These sleeping Jews. We know the pilot light is on, but we need to wake them up. So what they would do is they would do it through singing and joy and midos and achdus and things like that. The Alter Rebbe comes around and is like, okay, every Jew has intellect and has emotions. And in psychology for many years, the thought was, if someone has a problem with their emotions, change their emotions. The Alter Rebbe comes around and says, no. You want to change your emotions? You want to change your attributes? You want to change your midos? You have to change your intellect. You have to change what you think and how you think. And if you can conceptualize things that make you want to change, everything else will follow dominoes. Meaning, let's just say that I tell you, John, you make food for a living. And twice a day, you're making donuts for brisses, and you're making chicken wings at night. And you eat at every one of your kiddushes. And all of a sudden you gain 100 pounds.
Right.
And that makes you upset because you don't want to gain 100 pounds. I'm not going to say to you, John, just stop being upset about it and it'll fix it. I'm going to say, John, think about what happens when you eat at every single thing, right?
Right.
If you want to not gain 100 pounds, you have to understand what happens when you eat all of those things. And every time you eat those things, when you're not supposed to, you're going to gain weight, and that's going to make you fat and unhealthy, and then you're going to have medical problems. That understanding will make it to the point that when you really get that, you're not going to want to eat. You're going to see the donut and be like, yeah, I don't care. Or, yeah, I like it, but I'm not going to eat it, right? Or maybe I'll only eat it once a week. Now, you just changed your whole process and all your feelings about eating donuts simply by understanding the ramifications of what happens when you do those things.
Right.
So you can change your feelings and your emotions, how you feel about things, how you feel about doing things, by simply having a greater understanding and internalizing that understanding. The Alter Rebbe, the Baal Tanya, came around and said, yeah, I don't believe in this, let's just go jump around and be happy for the sake of God. Like, that's cool, but it's fleeting. How long is it going to last? Alter Rebbe says, if you understand what you really are, that you have this pilot light that's always on, and that is always connected to God, and you understand God himself, you will understand how great he is and how little you are, but that how much he loves you and chose you, no matter how small you are in comparison to his greatness. It's going to change what you want.
Right.
It's going to feel natural, right? I don't have to think about, do I want to go to the gym to work out? Sometimes I don't feel it as much, but then my intellect wakes up and says, hey, when you work out, you stay healthy, and then it makes you stronger, and then the food you eat goes towards better uses, and you have better energy, and your mind is better as a result of it at work. I don't have to go through that all the time. Once I accept it once, yeah, I might have to remind myself once in a while when I fall off, but that changes how I feel about going to the gym. I don't have to say, start dancing and go to the gym and get all excited and then you'll feel it. Like the fake it till you make it. I'll be like, no, I'm going to understand it and then I won't have to fake it. And that's what this whole book is about. Okay?
Right.
And that's what all of Chabad is about. That your intellect controls your emotions. And once your intellect controls your emotions, your actions are under control. So by the time you're done with this, and anyone who knows me can attest to this, it's not mind over matter, it's mind over heart. So anyone who says, yeah, I can will myself through an ice bath, that's great. The only reason they can do that is because they can keep their emotions in check because their mind is telling them that there's benefits of the ice bath that they believe in. The way of Chabad and the way of the Alter Rebbe is one that says your intellect and your mind rule supreme over your emotions. And no matter what you feel, no matter what your natural inclinations are, your mind can control all of that to not just tell you that you should do something when you don't want to, but to actually change how you feel about it so that you want to or don't want to. So that's what we're going to do once Yechiel shows up.
I'm good with that. Because like you say, you go through this process every day. You're supposed to daven 3 times a day. If you have no connection to that davening, it's just reading words. You know, like it's when you're born into this world, like, and you start in first grade, second grade, it gets embedded. That's who you are. That's what you are. So if you're not brought up that way, you got to be able to turn that switch on later in life and go, hey.
But without understanding,
right,
you're doing it for ulterior motives that don't actually stick with you.
Exactly.
They're just things that you do.
Right. It's just, and it gets old after a while. So then you just fall into that.
100%.
You fall into that trap. You're like, okay, I'm just gonna do what I do.
And I'm not saying there's not good reason to do that.
Right.
I'm just saying that there's a pilot light that's waiting for the burner to go crazy, and there's only one way to access it. For some people, they're naturally built in a way where they just like doing stuff. There are people who naturally they're regimented, they grew up with minyan, they're never going to miss a minyan. It's not because they feel anything. That's just what they do. They're doers, okay? But I'm not one of those people.
No,
I didn't go to minyan for 30 years. I couldn't wake up.
Right.
So, but once I understand that I actually want it because I understand everything that surrounds it and what it does for me and what it does for me with Hashem and why I even care to have a relationship with Hashem and all this other stuff, I don't have to think twice. Okay, so I slept later, I'll go to a later minyan. Who cares? I'm still going.
Right.
You know, for 1,000,000 years, I used to put on tefillin 10 minutes before it got dark. Because I was like, oh, I don't want to miss. I got to do it right now. And if something came up at that second, I would blame the fact that I didn't put on tefillin that day that something came up. Whereas I had 14 hours to put on tefillin and I just waited till the last minute, right? I'm just saying, you have to understand or else nothing makes sense.
Right, and I don't think it's never been taught and understood. You know, like that. I never really sat down and.
Because all you're doing is learning. You're learning Torah, which is great. It's a mitzvah in itself. but it doesn't grab you. There's nothing grabbing you, right? I could sit through 19 halacha shiurs a day and still not want to do any more of those halachas than I did before I know. I just know that they're halachas now, and now I feel bad if I don't do them.
Then you go to Thursday